I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so welcome to Budget Workshop number 4. Tonight's presentation is on state aid, fund balance, revenue, and expense. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Superintendent Ms. Burns.
Thank you, Mr. Tussey, and welcome to everybody that has joined us here this evening. This is the last in a series of work sessions to craft the 2022-23 school year budget. Tonight, Mrs. Pilati, our Assistant Superintendent for Business, will provide a review of the status of the proposed budget, and we will answer any questions that you may have. The state budget, the enacted state budget, was released on April 8th, 2022. That is later than usual. The year-over-year increase in public school spending is $2.08 billion. The $1.5 billion foundation aid increase for 22-23 brings the state 2/3 of the way to its commitment to complete implementation of the formula that was approved 15 years ago, with a promise of full funding in the next fiscal year. Additionally, the state included a minimum 3% foundation aid boost for school districts that are already fully funded. That would include West Islip. So this brings the important added element of fairness at a time when schools are coping with heightened inflation, and they're all sensitive to that at this point. Fortunately, as I mentioned, West Islip is fully funded in foundation aid, so our projected increase in foundation aid for the 2022-23 school year is the minimum 3%. Overall, West Islip will receive 2.26% more state aid compared to what was budgeted in the prior year. These are the latest projected average class sizes for 22-23. We monitor these numbers very closely throughout the spring and summer, and you may notice that there have been and will be adjustments based on families moving into and out of the district and on decisions made during the CPSE and CSE processes. Just from 2 weeks ago, you will notice that there have been some changes in the numbers because people are starting to tell us they're coming in, they're leaving us, so we are making the adjustments pretty much on a weekly basis at this point in time. We are well within all contractual ranges, but we are carefully watching the kindergarten and 4th grade class sizes across the district. We think we have captured all of our projected kindergartners, but you never know, as well as the 5th grade at Bayview. And now I will turn the presentation over to Assistant Superintendent for Business, Elisa Pilati, who will describe the budget components and how we have come to the proposed budget that we are sharing tonight.
Thank you, Mrs. Burns. Good evening, everyone. There are 3 main sources of revenue for school districts. Property taxes are the primary source of our local revenue. That's the amount of taxes that we can levy, which is subject to a tax cap. State aid is a second major source of revenue for districts, and it's either formula-driven, like a foundation aid formula, or it's expense-driven, such as a BOCES or a transportation aid. Other local revenues are the third source of revenue for school districts. They can include things such as a pilot payment, non-resident tuition, rental income, and a pilot payment, just so you're aware, is a payment in lieu of taxes. It's when a commercial property owner would enter into an agreement to make an annual payment instead of paying property taxes for a negotiated period of time. And in West Islip, we only have one pilot property, which is the veterinary clinic on Sunrise Highway. Our district's funding profile consists of approximately 70% of our revenue coming from property taxes, 27% comes from state aid, 2.8% comes from those other revenue categories, and just over 1% in fund balance. Since the tax cap was enacted, the budget formula has been revised to look like this. You must first calculate your restricted tax levy, which of course is based on your prior year's tax levy. We then add in the projected state aid, any local revenues we anticipate earning, any use of reserves, and any appropriated fund balance. The remaining amount is your district's expenditure budget. I'll now take you through each component of this budget formula. We calculated the district's allowable tax levy limit based on the OSC, the Office of the State Comptroller's multi-step formula, and our tax levy for the 2022-23 school year is $90,382,573, which equates to a 1.99% increase in the levy. We went over this formula in detail during our very first budget workshop. Our restricted tax levy was submitted to the OSC before the deadline of March 1st. In order to calculate the actual tax rate for next year, we would need three numbers. We would need the tax levy, the assessment values, as well as the homestead percentages. The school district is only responsible for one of those numbers, which is the tax levy. The final assessment values and homestead percentages actually come from the town of Islip, which we do not receive until the fall of 2022. However, since everyone is usually interested in knowing how the proposed levy will impact their own property taxes, we like to provide an estimated average increase. So based on an average assessed home of $45,000 in West Islip, and using prior year assessed values and prior year homestead percentages, the tax increase in the levy over the prior year is projected to be $176.85, or a 1.99% increase. This is an increase of about $14.74 per month. The district also provides detailed instructions on how to calculate your own property taxes, which you can find in the budget newsletter that will be mailed out to all district residents. There are various reasons why some districts might not go out at their maximum allowable tax levy. One reason this year and last year, of course, is that many districts are seeing a substantial increase in the state aid they are receiving due to the fact that they were not yet fully funded in foundation aid. Many districts are faced with millions, some upwards of 20 to 50 million, more than they had anticipated when building the 22-23 school budget. Our district, as Mrs. Burns mentioned, is only seeing an overall increase of 2.26% in state aid, as we are a fully funded foundation aid district and only receiving the minimum increase of 3% in foundation aid.
Mrs. Polani, could you just give an overview on foundation aid, maybe for some people who haven't been involved in budget meetings before?
Sure.
Just kind of what the difference in the two are.
The difference in which...
Well, the foundation aid.
Foundation aid versus overall state aid, so the
Correct.
3% number versus the 2.26% number.
Sure, so and I actually have a slide on
Okay.
state aid
Jump
up
ahead.
ahead if you want.
No,
I
that's
can wait
fine.
till I get to that
Good.
slide, if that's okay. So as we just discussed, the 1.99% increase in the levy equates to an annual levy for the average homeowner of $9,059, or a monthly increase of $14.74. This chart here shows the amount of the average annual levy at varying tax levy percentage increases. As you can see, a 1% increase in the tax levy would equate to an annual levy for the average homeowner of $8,971, or a monthly increase of $7.41. But it is equally as important to point out that the amount of funds that would have to be removed from the current proposed budget if the tax levy was less than the allowable levy limit of 1.99%. So for example, as you can see up on this chart, if the levy was set at 0%, which would mean the levy would be the exact same amount as the prior year, $1.8 million would have to be removed from the current budget. This type of decrease could potentially impact things such as class size, equipment, supplies, extracurricular clubs, and athletics. So this slide shows a summary of our state aid compared to what we had budgeted in the 21-22 school year. As we mentioned, we are a fully funded foundation aid formula, and this formula, I can't remember the exact year, Mr. McCann, but I believe it came out in 2007, and it has been frozen ever since. So there were so many districts that were not receiving their full amount based on the formula of aid that they should have been receiving, which is why many districts now, over this 3-year span, are receiving such a huge influx of aid. But again, we were one of those districts where the formula wasn't impacted for us. We were receiving the appropriate amount each year.
And if I might just say, that was tied to the GEA, the gap elimination adjustment, which we advocated for so vociferously over the course of the last, how many years? So we are fully funded, but there are still some districts that are owed quite a bit of money, and as Mrs. Plotty pointed out, in the tens of millions of dollars in some cases.
And Mrs. Plotty, I know you're probably going to get to this, so I'm sorry, but if we went with the 0% tax levy and there was the delta of $1.7 million, why can't that be taken from reserves?
Well, you would definitely not, I wouldn't recommend taking 1.8 million from reserves because then you're creating a hole in your budget that you would have to fund each year. So you're essentially creating a revenue source. Now each year you're going to have to fund it.
So eventually you would deplete your reserve, there would be nothing there.
And you'd have a
then
huge gap.
some year in the future, you're gonna be left with a multi-million-dollar gap.
Right.
So it's a hole that you would
Never be
dig
able
in
to,
that
right.
is-
You're digging yourself into a hole deeper each year, yes.
Exactly.
Which at one time this district was there.
I remember.
Right.
So as you can see up here, we are receiving the minimum increase for foundation aid, which is great, the 3%, because at least we're getting something. The changes in the expense-based aids that you see here, such as BOCEs, are just a result of the expenses that we would incur for these aid categories. So overall, we are looking at an aid increase of 2.26% for next year. There's one aid that is included on the state.
I'm sorry, so Mr. McCann, does that answer your question? Because I agree with you, there's a lot of confusion between
Yes.
the 2.26 and the, I think that was a very telling slide.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to cover one other area of state aid, because if you look in Newsday or if you're looking at some of the articles that are out there, you will see a number that doesn't directly tie to what you see in our budget presentations. And the reason for that is the state includes UPK funding on the state aid runs. They're very cute when they do that because they're not actually, that's not part of our approved budget. The UPK aid that appears in the state aid run is actually considered a granted aid, and we have to account for that in our special aid fund. So it is not included in the voter approved budget. We actually began our self-funded half-day pre-K program back in 2019-20. And in 21-22, this current school year, we were allocated $340,200 of UPK funding, which allowed us to transition to the full UPK program in each elementary building. And as required by education law, we also collaborated with a local agency and sent a portion of our students to South Shore Children's Center, who we did an RFP with. On the April state aid runs that we just received, it does show a significant infusion of support for universal pre-K all around. West Islip is now allocated $648,000 for the 2022-23 school year. So the district is able to educate 160 UPK students in our buildings, and the surplus of students are educated at South Shore. In 2022-23, our estimated UPK enrollment is 245 students. This additional UPK funding will now alleviate some of the costs for the additional students over and above the students that are paid for through the UPK funding. The district's other revenue sources are listed here. Other student fees will decrease by about $34,000, as you can see on the slide. The decrease is primarily attributable to the budgeted decrease in the driver's education revenue that we anticipate receiving. This is related to the fact that parents have been providing in-person instruction, and we expect this to continue. Not only is it because of, we don't think it will, it's going to be cost prohibitive if they go from the 4 people per car to 2, but we're also, I spoke with Tim Moran, who heads up our driver's education program. He also informed me that there is a severe shortage of driving instructors. So they're looking to potentially just continue with the parent training. Tuition revenue for other districts is expected to increase by approximately $130,000 due to the way that we will be billing for parentally placed students and applying the federal IDEA credit. Health services revenue is expected to increase by approximately $100,000. This is related to the enrollment of students at St. John the Baptist and the Bridges Academy, which are both located within our district. Rental income is projected to increase about $56,000 for next year, which is based off of our leases with our current tenants. Interest income is projected to decrease about $50,000, and other miscellaneous income is projected to increase about $58,500. So overall, our other revenues are projected to increase about 8.9%. School districts are permitted to establish reserve funds as a way to legally save money to finance future infrastructure, equipment, and any other requirements. They provide a degree of financial stability by reducing reliance on incurring debt to finance projects. They can also provide a budgetary option in the future that can help mitigate the need to cut costs, programs, services, or even raise taxes. On this slide is a list of our reserve funds that our district currently has. The Employee Benefit Accrued Liability Reserve, which is known as the EBLR Reserve, is used for the payment of accrued unused days upon an employee's retirement or termination. The Retirement Contribution Reserve is used for the payment of retirement contributions for the New York State Employee Retirement System, or ERS. And the TRS subfund is used for the payment of retirement contributions to the Teachers Retirement System, or TRS. The Workers' Compensation Reserve is for the payment of compensation, benefits, medical, hospital, and other expenses that are authorized by the Workers' Compensation law. The Unemployment Reserve is used to reimburse the State Unemployment Insurance Fund for payments made to claimants, and the Capital Reserve is used to pay for the cost of any major capital projects or large equipment purchases. For the 2022-23 school year, the district is budgeting for the use of reserves in the amount of $500,000, which will be split equally between the Employee Benefit Accrued Liability Reserve and the Workers' Compensation Reserve funds.
So that is money you're moving from the reserves to the general fund to make up income to the budget, correct?
Right, so that is going to be considered a source of revenue to help fund our budget. And if you look at the budget, those, the line item for compensated absences as well as workers' compensation costs has decreased in the budget to account for the fact that we will be supplying as a revenue source from the reserve.
Right. So due to the healthy nature of the reserves,
Yes.
we are able to fund that from that balance.
That's correct. They are both fully funded reserves, and the workers' comp is actually, has excess money in it,
Great.
which I'll get to. The most common type of assigned fund balance is the appropriated fund balance. The Board of Education may use a portion of fund balance to help finance the next year's budget, which is referred to as appropriated fund balance. Based on a historical analysis of our operating results and a recent OSC audit, the Office of the State Comptroller, it is recommended that the planned amount of assigned fund balance included as a revenue source in future budgets be gradually decreased. Therefore, we are proposing to decrease assigned fund balance by 15% next year, or $150,000. So this is the budget formula again, with all of our current year and prior year numbers. It is all the components that we have just gone through. And as you can see, our levy is projected to increase $1.8 million, or 1.99%. Our budget is projected to increase by $2.7 million, or 2.15% for next year. On the ballot in May, you will see 3 propositions. The first will be for the school budget for the 22-23 school year. The second proposition will be for the use of the current capital reserve. The third proposition will be for the establishment of a second capital reserve. And residents will also vote on the election of 3 Board of Education trustee seats. The current capital reserve fund was established and approved by the community during our May 2019 budget vote. Capital reserve funds allow a district to save money for future capital projects that would otherwise have to be funded through your annual budget or through a bond. The use of a capital reserve fund comes at no additional cost to taxpayers. The capital reserve is funded through surplus remaining monies at year end. As of our last fiscal year end, which was June 30th, 2021, the capital reserve fund had a balance of $6,026,622. However, there is a planned use, a voter-approved use of $1.6 million from this reserve during the 21-22 school year for 7 different projects. That would take the capital reserve fund balance down to a current balance of $4,346,622. The third proposition on the ballot is to create a second capital reserve to be used for future capital projects. This new reserve fund will be funded through excess monies at year-end, similar to our existing capital reserve, or through transfers from excess monies in other reserves. The workers' compensation and unemployment reserves were previously increased due to uncertainty surrounding COVID-19 related workers' comp and unemployment cases. However, now that more information has been obtained about how COVID-19 impacts these related claims, there are now funds that can be repurposed from both of these reserves, which again was a point that was brought up during our OSC audit and discussed with the auditor.
And one of the questions is, any idea of how much we will fund for that second capital, if approved?
If approved, we're able to start funding it with the 2021-22 school year, and as is also listed in the reserve plan, of course it's a draft reserve plan, we would be able to fund approximately $3 million from the excess in those two funds. That doesn't include any excess remaining funds at year end, which would be considered fund balance. So that's just considered for those two funds,
Right.
and that's as of this current school year. Another proposition on the ballot in May is to use the current capital reserve to do the proposed projects that are listed here during the 2022-23 school year. District-wide, we will be installing security window film on the first floor of all 7 of our school buildings. At the high school and the Udall Road Middle School, we will be renovating a total of 12 tennis courts. At the high school, we will be extending the campus-style fencing on Higbee Lane. At Beach and Udall Middle Schools, we will be renovating a total of 6 restrooms. At Paul J. Blue, we will be possibly creating an additional parking area as we currently do not have enough spaces for all of our staff. At the high school, we will be replacing all of the building fire alarms. These 6 projects are estimated to cost approximately $2.9 million. It is important to note that upon completion of these projects, any unspent funds would be returned to the capital reserve fund.
Ms. Bellotti, is the not to exceed for the entire fund or per project? So if a project was, to pick one of them, to go over, or is we can't go over at all for any individual project?
We typically do not go over for any individual project.
So like the bathrooms, 570,000, if it came in higher, we couldn't do that?
Correct.
Okay.
That's why when we get the estimates from the architect, they build in, it's a not to exceed, so they tend to go with the conservative higher amount.
Okay, thank you.
But any project that may not, for whatever reason, be addressed in a particular year, the money would go back
To the
into
reserve.
capital reserve.
And one point on that, I know because we're still in discussion about the Paul J. Blue parking lot, which I've been there during the school day, and I know there's less spots than the teachers. But we haven't finalized that, so we're putting on there to have that accessible. We don't have the actual plan yet, so that may or may not be spent.
That's correct, and BBS is still working to draw up a plan.
Right.
They recognize the dilemma that we face, and whether it can be done in 2 parts or not, and what would be the best way to go. So we should have that for you shortly at a BG meeting.
Great.
And if a project doesn't come to fruition, the money just goes back to the capital reserve. For 2022-23, we will have 3 board trustee seats open. The nominating petitions for the board trustee seats are due back to district office by April 18th. Our public budget hearing will take place here on May 10th. And our budget vote will be held at the high school gymnasium on May 17th between 7 a.m. and 9 p.m. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Anybody have any questions from the audience?
I think that was
Mrs. Worley,
She's like,
I kind of answered it already with the question about how building grounds, meaning basically the 1.6 million. So my confusion, I guess, will lie in, if it does get passed, it's going to be passed to 800,000 as of now. can it potentially be added in between now and the final announcement of the budget?
No.
The increase, we have to know, right, okay.
And so that's why we're looking to potentially break up the project to see what could be done that doesn't impact, say, a stage 2 of the project.
Okay.
Which we've done periodically around the district for various projects. We do it in stages. Yeah.
Thank you.
That was very comprehensive, thank you.
Oh, thanks.
All right, so before I read the resolution and ask to adopt, first I just want to congratulate everybody involved and thank you all for the hard work and everything that went into this. And this time of year, one thing that I learned from a superintendent I worked with that I have a great deal of respect for, he had said that the greatest emotional investment we'll ever make in our lives is that of our children, and the greatest financial investment we'll ever make is our home. And the best way to protect both is by investing in our schools. So I hope that the community does come out on May 18th and they vote to pass this budget. It's really outlines a lot of great things that we have lined up for our kids and community as well. So with that being said, the resolution reads, whereas the West Islip Union Free School District Board of Education is required to present the budget to the voters for the 2022-2023 school year. Now therefore be it resolved that the proposed budget for the 2022-23 school year be adopted for a total of $130,246,851. And be it further resolved that the 2022-23 property tax report card is approved to be transmitted to the New York State Department of Education excuse me, as so required. So can I have a motion to adopt the 2022-2023 school budget?
So moved. Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. All right, thank you everybody, and have a very good night, and we look forward to seeing you all again May 18th for the budget vote.